oh boy, we have a problem here. What is it? Well, I have an answer for you. Like the video and subscribe if you're new. Elemental powers are super common in multiple aspects of fiction. In every single generation of cartoons, we have gotten one representation or the other of these common powers of fire, water, air, and earth. What do you mean there's more elements? Man, anyways. Well, let's take Ben 10 for example, where the first ever transformation is the Fireman Heat Blast. He has the typical fire blasting, heat emitting superpowers, which was a genius start to a brand new show in the mid 2000s. However, these superpowers unloaded its own set of horrendous issues within the very first minutes of being on screen. With our first problem starting with this word here, paradigms. It looks like paradigms, doesn't it? These are basic frameworks or patterns of something. It's almost like a mold of sorts, and elemental powers fit into that heavily. Let's stay on fire powers so I can show you a simple paradigm that this element falls into. Now, fire users like Heat Blast don't just shoot fire blasts, but they come with certain quirks that fit into the mold of being a fire user. This applies even to Ben Tennyson when he goes Heat Blast, as he starts to act a bit differently once he becomes the embodiment of flame. Whenever Ben fights as Heat Blast, he becomes more passionate and extremely confident. We see this in real time when he takes on Vilgax in the episode Secrets, when he launches a huge over-the-top attack on the Calamari Green Man. He is very flashy and enthused in combat, and up until he is about to time out, he still fully believes that he can beat Vilgax, even though he is so outmatched.
What are you talking about? I'm just about to kick alien butt.
He has a similar delusion to myself waiting for Ben 10 news at the Annecy Festival. But just to double down on how much of a performative monster Heat Blast becomes, we can look at his fight against the Megawatts as well in the episode Tourist Traps. He uses big fire blasts, exaggerated misdirection, and of course over the top taunting, and the final nail in the coffin is when he loses his temper and has a complete rage-induced meltdown in the episode Don't Drink the Water. However, this is the source of our first problem with fire elementals, but let's draw a few more parallels so you can see what I mean. Take for example a popular firebender, Zuko. He is a delusionally confident pyrokinetic character. Just for a brief overview, he is still in his mid-teens on a journey to find what would be a 111-year-old human incarnation of a deity. He has large flashy fire blasts, and he has his own fire controlling style of power, being based on Northern Shaolin Kung Fu. This is powerful and aggressive, and we can see that in Zuko since he is so forceful and unrelenting. But let's stack this analysis with Kai from Ninjago. He has a strong sense of justice, but he is very stubborn and strong-willed, and also really overconfident. We can see that not only in his almost delusional desire to become the Green Ninja from early in the show, but in moments where he's trying to punch way above his weight class. Does that sound familiar to you? With that, it creates a paradigm of fire elementalists, where they are all overconfident, flashy, stubborn show-offs. However, the paradigm isn't limited to fire powers. In Ben 10, we have seen aliens like Terraspin, who are the representatives of the element air, which normally would fit into the paradigm of being peaceful, free-spirited, and pretty adventurous. And if we look at the home planet of these aliens, we can see where this is a pretty spot-on mold that they fit into. And if we could even double down, the same thing goes for air nomads, who are free-spirited pacifists. Red Tornado as well, who is a stoic and calm air-powered android, and even Sailor Uranus, who embodies that stoicism and independence that we see as a trait that air elementalists have. And these molds for these characters goes on and on for each element, where your personality is directly connected to the powers that you have. And that in itself is a huge problem. It makes everyone that fits into these power systems cliche. Now, cliche have their own benefits and purposes, but this one gets quite out of hand when every character can be pasted into a very specific mold in every show, every game, and every book. These kinds of personality archetypes are ever present, but where did these kinds of elemental cliches come from? Well, it's an amalgamation of numerous sources of influence that came out way before the invention of television. It's influenced by Greek mythology and philosophy, where fire is seen as energy and ambition, water is seen as life and fluidity, air was seen as movement, intellect, and communication, and earth was seen as reliable and sturdy. Pop quiz. Let me test you with this character here and see if you can tell what kind of personality he has. He has a water controlling combat style. If you said reserved, adaptable, or wise, you are absolutely correct, and you're probably a part of the problem. It's way too easy to just know how these guys operate, and it's a similar thing when we think about how their powers work as well. Let's take an element that we haven't mentioned yet, like Earth. Now, Diamond Head isn't quite the Badger Mole or Earthbender, but his powers were the same as any typical terraforming fighter, using powerful and forceful elements from the terrain to bully his enemies into submission. He also has moments where he throws pieces of the environment at his targets. And in Avatar, it's a very similar thing, where they can forcefully manipulate the environment and throw large rocks at their targets. And even in Naruto, where Earth-style jutsu manipulates the environment and terrain, and just like every other representation, it has great defensive capabilities and can throw rocks at their target. A similar thing goes for even ice elements. Large-scale attack with massive area of effect power that can disrupt your terrain, and guess what? It also freezes your opponent. These are ridiculously telegraphed and cliche paradigms that every element seems to fall into by themselves. And this kind of predictable and basic setting for these powers leads us to a major problem that I label as the rock paper scissors issue. Now, the game of rock paper scissors is pretty simple. Having been invented thousands of years ago in 206 BCE in the Ming Dynasty, the game underwent many different changes and styles, going from snake, slug, frog to village head, hunter, fox, and now our more modern rock paper scissors. The major principle of the game is that each piece of the game counters the other, which isn't groundbreaking information. However, elemental powers have a similar mold. We can see that in the primary 3 starters you get in Pokemon, where water beats fire, fire beats grass, and grass beats water. In Ben 10, this is also true, even though elemental matchups aren't so rigid. We can see where water beats fire, electricity beats water, and rock beats electricity. The 4 elements of most other series follows a similar route, even in anime like Naruto.
Each of the 5 chakra natures are strong against one chakra nature and weak against another. Fire is strong against wind, wind is strong against lightning, lightning is strong against earth, earth is strong against water, and water is strong against fire.
This sort of rock paper scissors dilemma creates a problem for elemental powers, as it can give battles a very predictable outcome because of how rigid the rule sets are. Let me give you an example of a battle that was already decided based on a bad elemental matchup. It all happens in this episode, My Big Fat Alien Wedding, where we have fire versus mud. Now, Ben is taking on 2 alien mud shapeshifters who are trying to ruin a wedding. He becomes Heat Blast and is stuck in a 2 versus 1 scenario.
And he seems a little overwhelmed by my girth and tonnage.
However, he gains an advantage when he realizes that Heat Blast's flames dry them up like cement. At this point here, the battle is completely over, as these 2 try to use their trump card on Ben, becoming an even bigger mud monster and trying to swallow him up. But it doesn't work, and the heat from Ben turns them both into giant mud sculptures. And many more occasions like that appear where elements outright lose to bad matchups. Stuff like Azula versus Katara, Ben versus the fire immune Limax, and even not so strict elemental battles like Livewire versus Rubber Gloves. These kinds of hard and fast rules make elemental combat very rigid and predictable, and it makes it even more difficult for the users themselves if they get into a bad matchup. However, these predetermined elemental weaknesses have been flipped on their heads multiple times throughout fiction, and we can use Heat Blast as a prime example. In the episode Monster Weather, the pyrokinetic Rockman is faced with a giant water monster. With every bit of logic, we can tell that Heat Blast is about as dead as a doorknob because his powers are useless. However, we get an opposing outcome where Ben uses his heat power and speed as an advantage to turn this water monster into an instant sauna, having it evaporate very quickly and completely. This sort of changes the way we look at elemental powers now, and it is all thanks to creativity. Now matchups have completely been shifted for elements because of this, and it's become a prevalent tactic used in cartoons and TV shows in order to change that one-dimensional outlook on these kinds of powers. In a battle like Charizard versus Blastoise for example, we can see it again, as the orange lizard is fighting a Pokemon that literally can kill him. However, through a creative use of his fire power and strength, he is able to take out Blastoise that should have had an overwhelming advantage. Another instance comes from one of the X-Men movies where Iceman takes on Pyro. Now normally fire would overwhelmingly have an advantage over ice, and you're right. However, in the right conditions, ice can overwhelm flames if there is enough volume. This creates a pretty neutral fight between the two, which ends with an overwhelming victory for Iceman, as he is able to take down Pyro and win the fight. This kind of a solution could help bring elemental powers out of that closed off box, which would stop them from being such a rigid power system. And this goes for the assigned personalities as well. This is easy to see in shows like Shaolin Showdown, where characters have their own elemental proficiency, but their personalities aren't always one-to-one. Let's take for example the main character of the show, Omi, who has control over the element of water. Omi is supposed to be adaptable, calm, and fluid. However, his depiction in the show is naive, boastful, and in some cases, very selfish. Even Azula in Avatar subverts her own paradigm, as she isn't angry and overconfident, but she is a calm, cold, and calculated firebender. Very different from your typical flame-empowered character, like Hotshot from Static Shock. But hey, that's just a Galvan's thoughts on what's wrong with elemental powers. Comment down below if you think I should do more videos like this. And thanks for watching. Let's break down the most overrated, tragic, and downright scam superpowers in Ben 10 and all of fiction.